It's time to critique a piece of art about critiquing pieces of art. Hello and welcome to Rotted Review of the Day, and today it is Netflix Tuesday, and being Netflix Tuesday, I am taking a look at the 2019 Netflix exclusive Velvet Buzzsaw. For me, having watched this was ultimately an enjoyable 2-hour ride of horror, art, and the satire between both that can wind up connecting them. There's one thing that I really want to emphasize about this movie straight away, and that is that, yes, the characters are over the top within this. The world itself is over the top, but it's also dealing with the world of the world of art, paintings and performance art and so on and so forth. Basically, the industry that is the art world, and that world can be obnoxious and over the top. So while this did walk the line of obnoxious parody, it was very careful not to cross it, and I really think that that's a critically important thing to note right up front. It never did the industry a full disservice by making fun of it. It instead just satirized it, and it really, I think, managed to walk that line well, that balance, find that balance well. So having said that, this movie follows a whole menagerie of characters within the industry of the art world. You had critics, you had agents, you had artists that worked underneath the agents or when contractually with the agents. You had studio space owners and museum owners. It was pretty much everybody that runs the gamut of the industry of art. And principally, this had the main character of Morph Vanderwalt, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, who was an art critic, a very renowned art critic. His written word can make or break an artist, make or break a studio, and he has all the lavish money and power in the world that he exists in. There's really not a whole lot, I would say, that it would be like a centralized main character, but even so, he does seem to be a bit of the binding element that works within all these other people that might not talk to each other. They talk to Morph. But the movie really kind of kicks off with Josefina, who is the secretary to the agent of Redora Hayes, played by Renee Russo. And Josefina, played by Zawe Ashton, she's on thin ice with Renee Russo, with her boss. And she happens to come across a tenant in her building that has passed away. She finds his dead body on the stairwell, and it is revealed to her later on that he left explicit instructions to the building owner that everything within his apartment must be destroyed. And she happens to come across the notion that he has art up there. And being on thin ice and being a bit opportunistic and being in a cutthroat industry, she decides to take the chance, roll the dice, and go upstairs and check out the apartment, check out this artwork. And she is amazed by not just the quality, but the sheer quantity of pieces that her neighbor has managed to punch out. And so she takes all of the art, brings them on down to her apartment, and in a kind of a half effort of becoming her own agent, decides instead, after being cornered, to partner with her boss in more of a partnership capacity than an employer capacity. And they work out all the finer details of the legal loopholes that they're going to have to work around. No, she didn't take them out of his apartment. She found them in the dumpster. The building manager did his due diligence by destroying them. She happened to come across them in a space that could be considered public and claiming them. And so they start to get released, or at least shown to the public. And everybody that witnesses these paintings is affected by them dramatically. Everybody wants a piece of these new Dees paintings. And they become the blow-up hit. So Renee Russo is managing them, managing the quantities, not really revealing how many they have, keeping a lot in crates and ultimately just kind of releasing them piecemeal. And strange things start happening. Not necessarily with the Dees paintings themselves, but their interaction with the other pieces of art around them and how fatal supernatural events start occurring, incorporating the Dees work with the other artworks of the museums and of the galleries and of the people's lives in the art world. Pretty much anybody that is profiting off of these paintings start to get murdered in horrific fashion. And that's pretty much where I will leave the plot without getting into too spoilery of territory. If I had a complaint about this movie, and I'm going to go ahead and throw up all the scores right now, each individual category is worth up to 25 points for a total score of 100 points possible. If I had to really critique one of the downsides of the plot of this film, which I really did enjoy, and I think it was very, very well executed and very rich and very detailed, the one thing that I could really say about it is that it seemed to focus more on exploring a generalized idea than actually telling a good quality horror story with a well fleshed out mythos. A lot of this can be answered with this simply by just saying, well, just because. Well, it just was. It focuses more on the outcome than on the whys. And for me, I love a good yarn. The whys are kind of where I find the real good stuff. And I was just a little bit... I felt a little bit like I had a rice cake instead of a bag of chips for a snack. But that would be pretty much my only real critique of the plot line of this one. It did get a pretty high score of 19 out of 25. The intent, I gave a 17 out of 25. I did find this to be very interesting. Not necessarily all that scary, but still interesting, still enjoyable, still entertaining as all get out. The one thing that I'll note, and I'm really going to try and phrase this very carefully because I really don't want to give any kind of spoilers or any outcome of the ending events, but horror films can take on many, many outcomes when dealing with characters of initial questionable morality. One we used to see a whole lot more of was the notion that redemption encourages reward. And then, there's several others, including pretty much everybody is screwed as soon as the wheel starts turning of the events. And this took a path that it worked within the context of the story. I'm not going to say that it worked against the plot or worked against the story, even worked against the characters. It took a turn. It took a path that I kind of wish it hadn't. I kind of wish it had taken a different one. I wish it had taken one of the two that I just mentioned here, just because it felt more proper. It felt more sympathetic to characters that I weren't expecting to like, but wound up actually liking anyway. Not really going to take points off for that, but in any kind of plot or acting or anything like that. But it did kind of affect my interpretation of it, and I think that kind of affected the intent category just a little bit there. Speaking of the acting, though, 17 out of 25 points. Pretty darn impressed by this one, except for the quality of the cast that it had. I'm not going to say that anybody really delivered a bad performance. Jake Gyllenhaal as Wolf Vanderwalt really, really stood out. He did a great, great job as Morph. The dramatic flares to the character, as well as kind of the heartbreaking cracks within the visage that started to show as the movie progressed. But for everybody else in here, and we're talking about a really stellar cast here, Rene Russo, John Malkovich, Toni Collette, and so on and so on. The only thing I'll really say is that they did an admirable job, but considering the quality that was possible out of them, it kind of seemed like they just showed up and phoned it in like a good performance by a seasoned boxer at an exhibition match and then went home. I'm not going to say that they did a bad job, certainly, but Jake Gyllenhaal wound up standing out amongst the crowd because of how much he put in on this one. And I was very, very impressed with his performance in this sea of fine quality actors. The technical, I gave a 22 out of 25. This had some really bright, cheerful tones to it, which really contributed to the kind of sterile atmosphere, and I think that was a really good touch. It did water down a bit of the moments of potential tension, but I think it kept it grounded more in reality, and I think that was kind of necessary when we're dealing with a little bit of an obnoxious satire, to have some levels of it grounded in reality. And I think that by if it had started to go the route of like fully muted tones and lighting that was more befit of a horror film, then I think it honestly would have made the art part of this dulled down. And I'm glad they didn't go that way, because the art is kind of the centerpiece. It is not, it's almost a character in itself, and it really needed to be highlighted, and it did do that. So it was a bit out of the ordinary for a lot of the horror films that I've been watching recently, but it really kind of stood out because of it. But all the CG, all the practical effects, and all the technical elements of this one, I really, really was very impressed with. So I have no problem giving it as high as a 22 out of 25. And that gives it a total score of 75 out of 100 points. I would absolutely recommend this to any horror fan, just right across the board. I do think this is absolutely worth watching. But additionally, I'll make a note that if you're any way connected to the world of art, especially as an industry, I do think that this would make a marvelous lark of a film to bask in as kind of a gruesome love song to your profession. So I wouldn't turn away from it, and I would give it a shot and just kind of recognize it for being the playful little romp that it is. So that should about do it for my review of 2019's Velvet Buzzsaw. I really thank you for joining me here today. If you like these videos, please click like and subscribe. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.